King of the Bingo Game by Ralph Ellison. The woman in front of him was eating roasted peanuts that smelled so good that he could barely contain his hunger. He could not even sleep and wished they'd hurry and begin the bingo game. There, on his right, two fellows were drinking wine out of a bottle wrapped in a paper bag, and he could hear the soft gurgling in the dark. His stomach gave a low, gnawing growl. If this was down south, he thought, all I'd have to do is lean over and say, "Lady, give me a few of those peanuts, please, ma'am," and she'd pass me the bag and never think nothing of it. Or he could ask the fellows for a drink in the same way. Folks down south stuck together that way. They didn't even have to know you. But up here it was different. Ask somebody for something and they'd think you were crazy. Well, I ain't crazy. I'm just broke, 'cause I got no birth certificate to get a job, and Laura about to die 'cause we got no money for a doctor. But I ain't crazy. And yet a pinpoint of doubt was focused in his mind as he glanced toward the screen and saw the hero stealthily entering a dark room and sending the beam of a flashlight along a wall of bookcases. This is where he finds a trap door, he remembered. The man would pass abruptly through the wall and find the girl tied to a bed, her legs and arms spread wide, and her clothing torn to rags. He laughed softly to himself. He had seen the picture 3 times, and this was one of the best scenes. On his right, the fellow whispered wide-eyed to his companion, "Man, look a-yonder! Damn! Wouldn't I like to have her tied up like that? Hey, that fool's letting her loose! Aw, man, he loves her. Love or no love!" The man moved impatiently beside him, and he tried to involve himself in the scene. But Laura was on his mind. Tiring quickly of watching the picture, he looked back to where the white beam filtered from the projection room above the balcony. It started small and grew large, specks of dust dancing in its whiteness as it reached the screen. It was strange how the beam always landed right on the screen and didn't mess up and fall somewhere, but they had it all fixed. Everything was fixed. Now suppose when they showed that girl with her dress torn, the girl started taking off the rest of her clothes, and when the guy came in, he didn't untie her but kept her there and went to taking off his own clothes. That would be something to see. If a picture got out of hand like that, those guys up here would go nuts. Yeah, and there'd be so many folks in here you couldn't find a seat for 9 months. A strange sensation played over his skin. He shuddered. Yesterday he'd seen a bedbug on a woman's neck as they walked out into the bright street, but exploring his thigh through a hole in his pocket he found only goose pimples and old scars. The bottle gurgled again. He closed his eyes. Now a dreamy music was accompanying the film, and train whistles were sounding in the distance, and he was a boy again, walking along a railroad trestle down south, and seeing the train coming, and running back as fast as he could go, and hearing the whistle blowing, and getting off the trestle to solid ground just in time, with the earth trembling beneath his feet, and feeling relieved as he ran down the cinder-strewn embankment onto the highway, and looking back and seeing with terror that the train had left the track and was following him right down the middle of the street, and all the white people laughing as he ran screaming. "Wake up there, buddy! What the hell do you mean hollering like that? Can't you see we're trying to enjoy this here picture?" He stared at the man with gratitude. "I'm sorry, old man," he said. "I must have been dreaming." "Well, here, have a drink. And don't be making no noise like that. Damn!" His hands trembled as he tilted his head. It was not wine, but whiskey. Cold, rye whiskey. He took a deep swaller, decided it was better not to take another, and handed the bottle back to its owner. "Thanks, old man," he said. Now he felt the cold whiskey breaking a warm path straight through the middle of him, growing hotter and sharper as it moved. He had not eaten all day, and it made him light-headed. The smell of the peanuts stabbed him like a knife, and he got up and found a seat in the middle of the aisle. But no sooner did he sit than he saw a row of intense-faced young girls, and got up again, thinking, "You chicks must have been lindy-hopping somewhere." He found a seat several rows ahead as the lights came on, and he saw the screen disappear behind a heavy red and gold curtain, then the curtain rising, and the man with a microphone and a uniformed attendant coming on the stage. He felt for his bingo cards, smiling. The guy at the door wouldn't like it if he knew about his having 5 cards. Well, not everyone played the bingo game, and even with 5 cards he didn't have much of a chance. For Laura, though he had to have faith. He studied the cards, each with its different numerals, punching the free center hole in each and spreading them neatly across his lap. And when the lights faded, he sat slouched in his seat so that he could look from his cards to the bingo wheel with but a quick shifting of his eyes. Ahead, at the end of the darkness, the man with the microphone was pressing a button attached to a long cord and spinning the bingo wheel and calling out the number each time the wheel came to rest. And each time the voice rang out, his finger raced over the cards for the number. With 5 cards, he had to move fast. He became nervous. There were too many cards, and the man went too fast with his grating voice. Perhaps he should just select one and throw the others away. But he was afraid. He became warm. Wonder how much Laura's doctor would cost. Damn that, watch the cards. And with despair he heard the man call 3 in a row, which he missed on all 5 cards. This way he'd never win. When he saw the row of holes punched across the 3rd card, he sat paralyzed and heard the man call 3 more numbers before he stumbled forward, screaming, "Bingo! Bingo!" "Let that fool up there," someone called. "Get up there, man!" He stumbled down the aisle and up the steps to the stage into a light so sharp and bright that for a moment it blinded him, and he felt that he had moved into the spell of some strange, mysterious power. Yet it was as familiar as the sun, and he knew it was a perfectly familiar bingo. The man with the microphone was saying something to the audience as he held out his card. A cold light flashed from the man's fingers as a card left his hand. His knees trembled. The man stepped closer, checking the card against the numbers chalked on the board. Suppose he had made a mistake. The pomade on the man's hair made him feel faint, and he backed away. But the man was checking the card over the microphone now, and he had to stay. He stood tense, listening. "Under the 0, 44, the man chanted. "Under the I, 7. Under the G, 3. Under the B, 96. Under the N, 13. His breath came easier as the man smiled at the audience. "Yes, sir, ladies and gentlemen, he's one of the chosen people." The audience rippled with laughter and applause. "Step right up to the front of the stage." He moved slowly forward, wishing that the light was not so bright. To win tonight's jackpot of $36.90, the wheel must stop between the 00, understand? He nodded, knowing the ritual from the many days and nights he had watched the winners march across the stage to press the button that controlled the spinning wheel and receive the prizes. And he now followed the instructions as though he'd crossed the slippery stage 1,000,000 prize-winning times. The man was making some kind of a joke, and he nodded vacantly. So tense had he become that he felt the sudden desire to cry and shook it away. He felt vaguely that his whole life was determined by the bingo wheel, not only that which would happen now that he was at last before it, but all that had gone before, since his birth and his mother's birth and the birth of his father. It had always been there, even though he had not been aware of it, handing out the unlucky cards and numbers of his days. The feeling persisted, and he started quickly away. "I better get down from here before I make a fool of myself," he thought. "Here, boy," the man called. "You haven't started yet." Someone laughed as he went hesitantly back. "Are you all reet?" He grinned at the man's jive talk, but no words would come, and he knew it was not a convincing grin. For suddenly he knew that he stood on the slippery brink of some terrible embarrassment. "Where you from, boy?" the man asked. "Down south." "He's from down south, ladies and gentlemen," the man said. "Where from? Speak right into the mic." "Rocky Mount," he said. "Rockmount, North Carolina." "So you decided to come down off that mountain to the U.S., the man laughed. He felt that the man was making a fool of him, but then something cold was placed in his hand, and the lights were no longer behind him. Standing before the wheel, he felt alone, but that was somehow right, and he remembered his plan. He would give the wheel a short, quick twirl, just a touch of the button. He had watched it many times, and always it came close to 00 when it was short and quick. He steeled himself. The fear had left, and he felt a profound sense of promise, as though he were about to be repaid for all the things he'd suffered all his life. Trembling, he pressed the button. There was a whirl of lights, and in a second he realized with finality that though he wanted to, he could not stop. It was as though he held a high-powered line in his naked hand. His nerves tightened. As the wheel increased its speed, it seemed to draw him more and more into its power, as though it held his fate, and with it came a deep need to submit, to whirl, to lose himself in its swirl of color. He could not stop it now, he knew, so let it be. The button rested snugly in his palm where the man had placed it, and now he became aware of the man beside him, advising him through the microphone, while behind the shadowy audience hummed with noisy voices. He shifted his feet. There was still that feeling of helplessness within him, making part of him desire to turn back, even now that the jackpot was right in his hand. He squeezed the button until his fist ached. Then, like the sudden shriek of a subway whistle, a doubt tore through his head. Suppose he did not spin the wheel long enough? What could he do, and how could he tell? And then he knew, even as he wondered, that as long as he pressed the button, he could control the jackpot. He and only he could determine whether or not it was to be his. Not even the man with the microphone could do anything about it now. He felt drunk. Then, as though he had come down from a high hill into a valley of people, he heard the audience yelling, "Come down from there, you jerk! Let somebody else have a chance. Old Jack think he done found the end of the rainbow." The last voice was not unfriendly, and he turned and smiled dreamily into the yelling mouths. Then he turned his back squarely on them. "Don't take too long, boy," a voice said. He nodded, and they were yelling behind him. Those folks did not understand what had happened to him. They had been playing the bingo game day in and night for years, trying to win rent money or hamburger change. But not one of those wise guys had discovered this wonderful thing. He watched the wheel whirling past the numbers and experienced a burst of exaltation. "This is God. This is the really, truly God." He said it aloud. "This is God." He said it with such absolute conviction that he feared he would fall fainting into the footlights, but the crowd yelled so loud that they could not hear. "These fools," he thought. "I'm here trying to tell them the most wonderful secret in the world, and they're yelling like they gone crazy." A hand fell upon his shoulder. "You'll have to make a choice now, boy. You've taken too long." He brushed the hand violently away. "Leave me alone, man. I know what I'm doing." The man looked surprised and held onto the microphone for support. And because he did not wish to hurt the man's feelings, he smiled, realizing with a sudden pang that there was no way of explaining to the man just why he had to stand there pressing the button forever. "Come here," he called tiredly. The man approached, rolling the heavy microphone across the stage. "Anybody can play this bingo game, right?" he said. "Sure, but—" He smiled, feeling inclined to be patient with his slick-looking white man with his blue sports shirt and his sharp gabardine suit. "That's what I thought," he said. "Anybody can win the jackpot as long as they get the lucky number, right? That's the rule, but after all—" "That's what I thought," he said. "And the big prize goes to the man who knows how to win it?" The man nodded speechlessly. "Well then, go on over there and watch me win like I want to. I ain't going to hurt nobody," he said, "and I'll show you how to win. I mean to show the whole world how it's got to be done." And because he understood, he smiled again to let the man know that he held nothing against him for being white and impatient. Then he refused to see the man any longer and stood pressing the button, the voices of the crowd reaching him like sounds in distant trees. Let them yell. All the Negroes down there were just ashamed because he was black like them. He smiled inwardly, knowing how it was. Most of the time he was ashamed of what Negroes did himself. Well, let them be ashamed for something this time, like him. He was like a long, thin black wire that was being stretched and wound upon the bingo wheel, wound until he wanted to scream, wound, but this time himself controlling the winding and the sadness and the shame, and because he did, Laura would be all right. Suddenly the lights flickered. He staggered backwards. Had something gone wrong? All this noise. Didn't they know that although he controlled the wheel, it also controlled him, and unless he pressed the button forever and ever, it would stop, leaving him high and dry and high on this hard, high, slippery hill, and Laura dead? There was only one chance. He had to do whatever the wheel demanded. And gripping the button in despair, he discovered with surprise that it imparted a nervous energy. His spine tingled. He felt a certain power. Now he faced the raging crowd with defiance, its screams penetrating his eardrums like trumpets shrieking from a jukebox. The vague faces glowing in the bingo lights gave him a sense of himself that he had never known before. He was running the show, by God. They had to read to him, for he was their luck. This is me, he thought. Let the bastard yell. Then someone was laughing inside him, and he realized that somehow he had forgotten his own name. It was a sad, lost feeling to lose your name, and a crazy thing to do. That name had been given to him by the white man who had owned his grandfather a long time ago down south. But maybe those wise guys knew his name. "Who am I?" he screamed. "Hurry up and bingo, you jerk!" They didn't know either, he thought sadly. They didn't even know their own names. They were all poor, nameless bastards. Well, he didn't need that old name. He was reborn. For as long as he pressed the button, he was the man who pressed the button, who held the prize, who was the king of bingo. That was the way it was, and he'd have to press the button even if nobody understood, even though Laura did not understand. "Live!" he shouted. The audience quieted like the dying of a huge fan. "Live, Laura, baby! I got hold of it now, sugar! Live!" He screamed it, tears streaming down his face. "I got nobody but you!" The screams tore from his very guts. He felt as though the rush of blood to his head would burst out in baseball seams of small red droplets, like a head beaten by police clubs. Bending over, he saw a trickle of blood splashing the toe of his shoe. With his free hand, he searched his head. It was his nose. God, suppose something had gone wrong. He felt that the whole audience had somehow entered him and was stamping its feet in his stomach, and he was unable to throw them out. They wanted the prize. That was it. They wanted the secret for themselves, but they'd never get it. He would keep the bingo wheel whirling forever, and Laura would be safe in the wheel. But would she? It had to be, because if she were not safe, the wheel would cease to turn. It could not go on. He had to get away. Vomit. All, and his mind formed an image of himself running with Laura in his arms down the tracks of the subway just ahead of an A train, running desperately, vomit, with people screaming for him to come out but knowing no way of leaving the tracks because to stop would bring the train crushing down upon him, and to attempt to leave across the other tracks would mean to run into a hot third rail as high as his waist, which threw blue sparks that blinded his eyes until he could hardly see. He heard singing, and the audience was clapping its hands. "Shoot the liquor to him, Jim boy, clap, clap, clap. Well, call the cop, he's blowing his top. Shoot the liquor to him, Jim boy." Bitter anger grew within him at the singing. "They think I'm crazy. Well, let 'em laugh. I'll do what I gotta do." He was standing in an attitude of intense listening when he saw that they were watching something on the stage behind him. He felt weak, but when he turned he saw no one. If only his thumb did not ache so. Now they were applauding, and for a moment he thought that the wheel had stopped, but that was impossible. His thumb still pressed the button. Then he saw them. 2 men in uniform beckoned from the end of the stage. They were coming toward him, walking in step, slowly, like a tap-dancing team returning for a third encore, but their shoulders shot forward, and he backed away, looking wildly about. There was nothing to fight them with. He had only the long black cord which led to a plug somewhere backstage, and he couldn't use that because it operated the bingo wheel. He backed slowly, fixing the men with his eyes as his lips stretched over his teeth in a tight, fixed grin, moved toward the end of the stage, and realizing that he couldn't go much further, for suddenly the cord became taut and he couldn't afford to break the cord. But he had to do something. The audience was howling. Suddenly he stopped dead, seeing the men halt, their legs lifted as in an interrupted step of slow-motion dance. There was nothing to do but run in the other direction, and he dashed forward, slipping and sliding. The men fell back, surprised. He struck out violently, going past. "Grab him!" He ran, but all too quickly the cord tightened resistingly, and he turned and ran back again. This time he slipped them and discovered by running in a circle before the wheel he could keep the cord from tightening, but this way he had to flail his arms to keep the men away. Why couldn't they leave a man alone? He ran, circling. "Ring down the curtain!" someone yelled. But they couldn't do that. If they did, the wheel flashing from the projection room would be cut off. But they had him before he could tell them so, trying to pry open his fist, and he was wrestling and trying to bring his knees into the fight and holding onto the button, for it was his life. And now he was down, seeing a foot coming down, crushing his wrist cruelly, down as he saw the wheel whirling serenely above. "I can't give it up!" he screamed. Then quietly, in a confidential tone, "Boys, I really can't give it up." It landed hard against his head, and in the blank moment they had it away from him, completely now. He fought them, trying to pull him up from the stage as he watched the wheel spin slowly to a stop. Without surprise, he saw it rest at 00. "You see?" He pointed bitterly. "Sure, boy, sure, it's okay," one of the men said, smiling. And seeing the man bow his head to someone he could not see, he felt very, very happy. He would receive what all the winners received. But as he warmed in the justice of the man's tight smile, he did not see the man's slow wink, nor see the bow-legged man behind him step clear of the swiftly descending curtain and set himself for a blow. He only felt the dull pain exploding in his skull, and he knew, even as it slipped out of him, that his luck had run out on the stage.